Hello everyone, let's begin the systemic embryology. So under systemic embryology, the first topic which we are going to learn today is the development of body cavities, which continues with the development of diaphragm. So we shall start with the development of body cavities. To understand the development of body cavities, that is the peritoneal cavity and the pericardial cavity and pleural cavities, we should know about intraembryonic coelom. So here you can see an image where the section is taken, that is it is taken coronally, so that it shows the blue lining cavity is the amniotic cavity. And yellow lining cavity is the yolk sac cavity, which is regressed to a smaller size. And we can appreciate intraembryonic mesoderm, which is shown red or pink in color. So intraembryonic coelom, it is the cavity which becomes prominent during fourth week of intraembryonic life due to the folding of embryo. So the cavity appears within the lateral plate of intraembryonic mesoderm. So this one, the pink one or the red one, is the intraembryonic mesoderm. The cavity which we see here, which is developing within the intraembryonic mesoderm, that is the intraembryonic coelom. So because of the presence of this intraembryonic coelom or the cavity, it divides the lateral plate mesoderm into dorsal somatopleuric mesoderm and ventral splanchnopluric mesoderm. So this one is the So we can see the lining along the amniotic cavity, inner side of the amniotic cavity, that is dorsal somatopleuric mesoderm, and the ventral splanchnopluric mesoderm, we can see it is along the yolk sac. So the somatopleuric layer is related to the ectoderm and splanchnopluric layer, it is related to the endoderm, which is lining the yolk sac. In fourth week of intraembryonic development, in intraembryonic coelom assumes a horseshoe shape. So here we can see on each side it is appearing. Later we can appreciate becoming larger coelom. So here is the intraembryonic coelom. We can see on each side, and slowly they coalesce to form a horseshoe-shaped cavity. So it provides the space for the organs to develop and move within the cavity, this intraembryonic coelom. So the intraembryonic coelom is divided into three cavities during fourth week of intrauterine life, that is the pericardial cavity and two pericardio-peritoneal canals and peritoneal cavity. So these cavities are lined by the parietal mesothelium, which is derived from somatopleuric mesoderm, and visceral mesothelium, which is derived from the splanchnopluric mesoderm. So this lining is from the splanchnopluric mesoderm and the peripheral lining is from the somatopleuric mesoderm. Next we shall talk about the pericardial cavity, the cranial part of the cavity which bends ventrally due to the head fold of embryo. So here is the head fold. So due to the head fold of the embryo, we can see the cardiac bulge lies ventral to the embryo. So the cranial part of the cavity which bends ventrally due to the head fold of the pericardial cavity. So this is the pericardial cavity where we can see the developing of the heart. And its narrow central part lies cranial to midline behind the septum transversum in front of the procaudal plate. So after folding of the embryo, the pericardial cavity lies ventral and two pericardio-peritoneal canals pass on each side of the foregut. So this is the developing foregut. And this canal, which is the pericardio-peritoneal canals, One side of the canal we are seeing. Similarly, on the other side of the foregut also it communicates. So there are two pericardio-peritoneal canals which pass on either side of the foregut. So the two lung buds arise from the foregut, invaginate into this pericardio-peritoneal canals. So here we can see the lung bud. So here is the sagittal view. So here is the horizontal section where we can see the developing lung buds. So this is the heart, developing heart, where we can see on each side pericardio-peritoneal canals are forming. So the lateral extensions of the pericardial cavity forms future pleural and peritoneal cavities. So the distal end of these lateral extensions continues into extraembryonic coelom. So these lateral extensions, it continues into extraembryonic coelom on each side. And these communications are important because the midgut herniates through the communication through the umbilical opening, and this communication is a temporary communication, and it is lost usually during 10th week after the complete involution of midgut loops. So next we shall talk about the peritoneal cavity. So during the folding of the embryo, the lateral folds approximate with each other on the ventral aspect of the embryo. So this is the dorsal aspect and here is the ventral aspect, and this is the neural tube, and we can see the incorporated part of the gut which is present inside, which is a part of yolk sac, which is present inside the body cavity as the gut, and around the gut here is the intraembryonic coelom, and we can see the ventral part of the intraembryonic coelom, they approximate it with each other. So in the abdominal region, during the folding, these lateral folds, they approximate with each other with the ventral aspect of the embryo. At the site of approximation, the ventral mesentery. So initially this is the ventral mesentery. So this ventral mesentery disappears, resulting a large horseshoe-shaped cavity which is called as peritoneal cavity, and it extends from the cardiac area to the pelvic region. So here we are seeing the coronal section, that is the reason you are seeing horseshoe-shaped cavity. So in the sagittal section, this forms the peritoneal cavity. So let's talk about pericardio-peritoneal canals. It is as the pericardial cavity is relocated ventrally anterior to the foregut. As a result, the pericardial cavity opens into pericardio-peritoneal canals which are dorsal to the foregut on either side. So you can see here. So lateral they get connected dorsal to the foregut on either side. Dorsal mesentery. After completion of the folding of the embryo, the lower part of the foregut and the whole of the midgut and hindgut, they are suspended from the dorsal body wall by dorsal mesentery. So this forms the future dorsal mesentery. So the mesentery is a double-layered peritoneum which covers the visceral organs and connected to the abdominal wall, and that is ventral mesentery will connect the ventral side of the abdominal wall, and dorsal mesentery connects the dorsal side of the abdominal wall, that is the posterior abdominal wall, and it conveys mainly the neurovascular bundle. And both dorsal and ventral mesenteries divide the peritoneal cavity into right and left halves temporarily. So we can see here, this is the right half and this is the left half, which are present temporarily. Eventually, the ventral mesentery disappears except near the caudal part of the foregut, which forms the future stomach. So this ventral mesentery, this part, it completely disappears except at the caudal, that is the lower part of the foregut, where it forms future stomach, and which is continuous with the rest of the peritoneal cavity, that is the greater sac. So The sac present behind the stomach would be the lesser sac. And the communication between this greater sac and the lesser sac is the epiploic foramen or foramen of Winslow in adults. The blood vessels traverse between the layers of dorsal mesentery. So here is the dorsal mesentery where we see the blood vessels traverse through this. Not only the blood vessels, even the nerves also travel through this dorsal mesentery. Septum transversum. Septum transversum is the aggregation of mesenchymal tissue derived from the mesoderm. So the septum transversum is a thick plate of mesodermal tissue that occupies the space between the thoracic and abdominal cavities. So here is the thoracic cavity where we can see developing heart and lung buds. So this partition what we are seeing here, which is developed from the surrounding mesenchyme and mesoderm, is the septum transversum. Initially, it lies cranial to the heart. So this is after the folding where we are seeing caudal to the heart. This is the cranial end of the embryo. So in the beginning, the septum transversum is cranial to the developing heart. But later, due to the head fold, that is due to the folding, cranial folding of the embryo, it is repositioned between the heart and the connecting stalk, that is the vitellointestinal duct. The septum transversum forms the central tendon of diaphragm, which is like a partial partition between the thoracic cavity and abdominal cavity. So this partition forms in each pericardio-peritoneal canals, separating the pericardial cavity from the pleural cavity. Along the lateral wall of the pleuropericardial canal, the membranous ridges appear a pair of superior and a pair of inferior ridges because of the growth of lung buds. So here are the lung buds which are grown enormously, and this is developing heart. So this forms the pleural cavity where lung buds are located. The cavity surrounding the heart is the pericardial cavity, and these are the blood vessels, aorta, pulmonary trunk. So because of the growth of the lung buds, the superior ridges are the pleuroperitoneal folds located below the lung buds. So below the development of lung buds, we see the superior ridges of pleuroperitoneal folds. So let's see the positioning of intraembryonic coelom. To form a definitive pericardial, pleural and peritoneal cavities from single intraembryonic coelom, three partitions develop. One is paired pleuropericardial membranes, the other is the diaphragm. So let's talk about this pleuropericardial membrane. So to understand that, first we should look on this developing lung buds. So the lung buds here we can see they grow enormously into pleuropericardial canals, which are the future pleural cavities. And as the pleural cavity expands around the developing heart, splitting the mesenchyme into outer layer which forms the thoracic wall. So this is the outer layer which forms the thoracic wall, and the inner layer which is pleuropericardial membrane and which forms the fibrous pericardium and the covering of pericardial sac enclosing the heart. So this is the inner layer which forms the fibrous pericardium enclosing the heart. So pleuropericardial membranes form the partition between the pericardial and pleural cavities, and each pleuroperitoneal canal lies lateral to the primitive esophagus. So here is the esophagus. So these partitions, that is the septum transversum and also pleuropericardial membranes, contain mainly cardinal veins which drain from the body wall of the embryo into the sinus venosus. And lateral pleuroperitoneal folds grow to form membranes. They are like concentric fold edges projects into the caudal part of pericardio-peritoneal canal. And these canals that separate the pericardial cavity from the peritoneal cavity. So during 6th week, these membranes fuse with the dorsal mesentery of esophagus. So during 6th week we can see here, this is the purple one is from the septum transversum, and this is pericardio-peritoneal membranes. So which are initially the canals which separates the pericardial cavity from the peritoneal cavity. So during 6th week, these membranes fuses with the dorsal mesentery of esophagus and septum transversum to form a part of diaphragm. With the growth of the lung bud into the pericardio-peritoneal canal, a pair of membranous ridges are produced in the lateral wall of this canal. So these are a cranial ridge called as pleuropericardial fold, which is present above the developing lung, and caudal ridge, which is called pleuroperitoneal fold, which is below the lung bud. So pleuropericardial fold, which separates the pericardial cavity from the pleural cavity as they enlarge, and gradually the folds become membranous and form pleuropericardial membrane, and as the pleuroperitoneal fold enlarges, it projects into the pleuroperitoneal canal. So that is about the pleuropericardial and pleuroperitoneal membrane. So pleuropericardial membrane forms a partition between the pleural cavity and pericardial cavity, which forms the fibrous pericardium, whereas the pleuroperitoneal membrane, which forms a part of diaphragm. So this completes the formation of body cavities. Thank you.